Tonight, we're not stepping into some grand hall of kings or the mind of a medieval philosopher. We're stepping straight into the muck, a real battlefield. But don't expect movie slow-motion charges, shining armor, or choreographed swordplay. No, this is the truth behind the myth, soaked in blood, wrapped in confusion, and caked in the kind of grime that clings to the soul. Before we march into it, take a breath. Let the lights dim. Let your room go quiet, except maybe for a soft fan hum or the faint rattle of distant thunder. And now, step forward. You wake not to sunlight or birdsong, but to the sound of a horn that also kind of sounds like a man screaming march. As if it were a curse. There's no soft bed. There's no soft anything. You're wrapped in stiff armor, lying on damp earth, aching in places you forgot existed. Your chainmail hugs you like a desperate ex. You try to stretch, mistake. Pain radiates through every joint. Everything hurts, and you haven't even stood up yet. Around you, other soldiers stir. No one smiles. No one sings. One man still sleeps with his face buried in a helmet half filled with rainwater. Another is extracting a slug from his boot using a knife that might have been sharper 3 wars ago. Someone coughs in a way that suggests they either swallowed a bug or forgot how lungs work. You glance at the morning meal, and wish you hadn't. It's a chunk of bread that doubles as a medieval self-defense weapon. Possibly baked last Easter. Possibly twice. You gnaw at it slowly, not because you're savoring it, but because chewing feels like you're working out the jaw muscle you strained at yesterday's feast, which included something that might once have been meat and a vegetable that had clearly lost its way in life. Water. That's for gamblers. You sip warm ale because everyone agrees it's safer to be slightly buzzed than violently poisoned. Grooming. Not a thing. You splash a bit of muddy water on your face just to feel something. You haven't seen your own reflection in weeks, and frankly, that's for the best. You can smell yourself, though. Your gear reeks of old sweat and newer fear. You buckle on your armor anyway. Time to move. Then come the shouted orders. Form up. Move out. Barked by a man on a pristine horse who, judging by his posture, hasn't walked a single muddy mile in his life. Grumbling echoes through the camp. Armor clinks. Swords clatter. Someone's already limping, barefoot versus sharp rock never ends well. The mud doesn't just slow you down, it tries to pull you under. With every step, it sucks at your boots like it's bargaining for your soul. And the battle hasn't even begun. You're already soaked, sore, and second-guessing your life decisions. And here's the worst part, this is considered a good morning. Then, march. You obey, not from loyalty or courage, but because the alternative is being labeled a deserter. And in this army, that doesn't come with a scolding. It comes with a missing limb. So you slog forward. Every step a symphony of wet misery. The ground isn't even ground anymore. It's sadness in liquid form. You pause to fix your gear, fall behind, and instantly feel the cold glare of the man behind you. His eyes say, if you make me trip again, I will bury you with a spoon. Armor, you discover, is terrible for walking. It pinches. It rubs. It creates friction in places you didn't know had skin. Your thighs are forming a rebellion. Your shoulders protest. You are, for all intents and purposes, a sweaty, steaming iron sausage. Someone up front breaks wind with the power of a battle cry. The stench hits like a warning. You try breathing through your mouth, regret it, then try not breathing at all. Welcome to the march. Welcome to war. You try breathing through your mouth, but the regret is immediate and profound. The stench is a blend of sweat, decay, and something that might once have been stew. Your march continues past a flattened hedgehog, a broken cart, and something that definitely looks like a human toe. Nobody stops. Stopping only gets you noticed, and yelled at. Not that yelling is reserved for slackers anymore. The sergeant shouts at everything now. Trees, birds, clouds, the wind. Yelling has replaced whatever personality he used to have. Morale is a distant memory. Some men sing in tones better suited for funerals. Others whisper frantic prayers to gods they barely remember. And one poor soul simply screams into the wind with a frequency that no one questions anymore. It's strangely comforting. You entertain a hopeful thought, maybe the enemy will just surrender. But then the dreadful counter-thought arrives, they're probably thinking the same thing. Which means both sides are just marching toward a mutual panic where no one really knows who's stabbing who, and your biggest challenge will be remembering which end of your spear is supposed to go in first. After what feels like an eternity of trudging, a hill looms ahead. Naturally. Medieval battles seem to have a written contract, must take place on stupid hills. The climb begins. Someone slips, rolls down, and becomes the envy of the group. No one helps. He's free now. And still you march. Eventually, you reach the camp. It's less a base and more an outbreak. Tents exist, sure, but only if you're noble or bribe the quartermaster. The rest of you settle in wherever the mud is marginally less cursed. You collapse. That's your bed now. Your neighbor flops down beside you. Congratulations, you've just founded a miserable microvillage. Dinner is a bowl of gray. Not as a flavor. As a lifestyle. You ask what's in it. The cook meets your gaze for 5 solid seconds, then turns and walks away. You eat it anyway, because hunger outranks fear. You just hope the meat didn't have friends. Around you, soldiers busy themselves with survival rituals. Some sharpen weapons they can barely lift. Others roll dice like they're gambling for their souls. A few pray loudly, theatrically. Not out of faith, but to be seen praying. Just in case divine protection is based on volume. The soundtrack to your evening includes the following: wet coughs, distant sobbing, a tune about bread sung off-key, and a man attempting to strangle a lute into submission. Somewhere, a knight barks an order. He's spotless. He smells like lavender. You instantly despise him. Night falls. You curl into your damp cloak, next to someone who snores like a dragon learning to play bagpipes. Sleep proves difficult. Your brain plays reruns of every way you might die tomorrow. Or tonight. That goat looks vengeful. Just as you begin to drift off, a voice echoes through the camp, form up at sunrise. Marvelous. Morning arrives like a slap. You haven't slept. You haven't brushed your teeth. Not that it matters, most of them are missing or loose anyway. Trumpets blare. Groans ripple across the mud. You peel yourself from your lice-ridden blanket and pretend to be alive. The others do the same. You line up because people in rows look more battle-ready. That's the theory. Reality is a collection of aching bodies and haunted stares. You join them with feet that forgot how to be feet and a stomach that's already reconsidering breakfast. And then he arrives. The noble commander. Gleaming, polished, unblemished by mud or mortal suffering. His armor shines. His boots have seen only clean ground. His expression says he's disappointed in everyone, but mostly in the peasants who dare exist near him. He carries the calm smugness of someone who's never tripped over a corpse or eaten stew with teeth in it. You hate him on sight. A single shout pierces the tension, shields up. You react instantly, raising your battered shield just in time to see someone beside you still turning it over like he's trying to solve a puzzle. A breath later, the sky goes dark, not from storm clouds, but from a swarm of arrows rising like black birds and arching back down with purpose. They fall, not like feathers, but like judgment. There is no grace in what happens next. No slow motion, no noble choreography. Arrows drop like vengeful needles from above, and every one of them means business. The soldier 2 rows up drops silently, an arrow planted in his shoulder like a quill in an inkpot. Someone screams. Someone else sneezes mid-curse. It's chaos, with just enough order to remind you this was all carefully planned by people who won't be bleeding today. Movies lie. Arrows don't gently pierce the air, they hammer into it. They slam into flesh, snap against shields, and sometimes ricochet wildly. Some hit armor and fall harmlessly. Others hit armor and keep going. Some hit you in ways you won't feel until later. There is no finesse. There is only force and splinters. You crouch, pulling your shield closer. It suddenly feels far too small and questionably built. When an arrow clanks off the front, you whisper your gratitude and give it a name, Gerald. You don't know why. You just do. Gerald, you murmur, get me through this and I'll forgive every dent, every rattle. You vow to never again mock its weird curve. Around you, men curse, pray, scream. One man is yelling that he's hit, but you suspect he's just desperate for an excuse not to move forward. The second volley comes before the first has even finished landing. There's no rhythm, no pattern, just a storm of screaming wood and metal. Veterans lower themselves and mutter the names of saints. Newcomers sob. One man lays flat in the mud and plays dead. You consider joining him. Then it stops. The silence doesn't feel victorious. It feels like a held breath. You're alive. Gerald held. But now, the next phase begins, and it's worse. Close combat. There's no rousing music. No heroic charge. No speech. 1 second, you're trying to stop shaking. The next, the line surges forward, not out of bravery, but because staying behind means getting trampled by the panicked wave of bodies behind you. It's not about courage, it's about not being crushed. Someone ahead yells something about glory and immediately vanishes under boots. You don't stop. You want to, but survival doesn't allow detours. Then you hit, literally. Bodies crash together like sacks of meat and steel. There's no elegance. You don't duel. You don't parry. You flail. You swing your weapon, not at an enemy, but at a blur of movement. You don't aim. You just try to make space between yourself and what wants to kill you. Your sword, or is it an axe now? A sharpened stick, connects with something. Or someone. You feel the impact more than see it. The sound is metal on metal, metal on bone, boots on mud, lungs straining to scream over each other. There's no time for strategy. You are shoulder to shoulder with strangers who smell like terror. You catch onion on someone's breath and feel oddly betrayed. A man to your right swings too wide and nearly hits you. A man to your left falls, then rises again with blood on his face and eyes that look centuries old. Someone swings at your head. You duck. They miss. The blow connects with a third soldier who yells and keeps going. You share a look, a brief, almost polite moment of mutual horror. Then it's gone. There's no room for blame here. Just instincts and noise. You try to remember your training, but it was mostly yelling and panic drills. Swing hard. Don't die. That's all they taught you. So that's what you do. You swing. You duck. You miss. You swing again. And somehow, despite the noise, the blood, the confusion, you're still standing. A single shout pierces the tension, shields up. You react instantly, raising your battered shield just in time to see someone beside you still turning it over like he's trying to solve a puzzle. A breath later, the sky goes dark, not from storm clouds, but from a swarm of arrows rising like black birds and arching back down with purpose. They fall, not like feathers, but like judgment. There is no grace in what happens next. No slow motion, no noble choreography. Arrows drop like vengeful needles from above, and every one of them means business. The soldier 2 rows up drops silently, an arrow planted in his shoulder like a quill in an inkpot. Someone screams. Someone else sneezes mid-curse. It's chaos, with just enough order to remind you this was all carefully planned by people who won't be bleeding today. Movies lie. Arrows don't gently pierce the air, they hammer into it. They slam into flesh, snap against shields, and sometimes ricochet wildly. Some hit armor and fall harmlessly. Others hit armor and keep going. Some hit you in ways you won't feel until later. There is no finesse. There is only force and splinters. You crouch, pulling your shield closer. It suddenly feels far too small and questionably built. When an arrow clanks off the front, you whisper your gratitude and give it a name, Gerald. You don't know why. You just do. Gerald, you murmur, get me through this and I'll forgive every dent, every rattle. You vow to never again mock its weird curve. Around you, men curse, pray, scream. One man is yelling that he's hit, but you suspect he's just desperate for an excuse not to move forward. The second volley comes before the first has even finished landing. There's no rhythm, no pattern, just a storm of screaming wood and metal. Veterans lower themselves and mutter the names of saints. Newcomers sob. One man lays flat in the mud and plays dead. You consider joining him. Then it stops. The silence doesn't feel victorious. It feels like a held breath. You're alive. Gerald held. But now, the next phase begins, and it's worse. Close combat. There's no rousing music. No heroic charge. No speech. 1 second, you're trying to stop shaking. The next, the line surges forward, not out of bravery, but because staying behind means getting trampled by the panicked wave of bodies behind you. It's not about courage, it's about not being crushed. Someone ahead yells something about glory and immediately vanishes under boots. You don't stop. You want to, but survival doesn't allow detours. Then you hit, literally. Bodies crash together like sacks of meat and steel. There's no elegance. You don't duel. You don't parry. You flail. You swing your weapon, not at an enemy, but at a blur of movement. You don't aim. You just try to make space between yourself and what wants to kill you. Your sword, or is it an axe now? A sharpened stick, connects with something. Or someone. You feel the impact more than see it. The sound is metal on metal, metal on bone, boots on mud, lungs straining to scream over each other. There's no time for strategy. You are shoulder to shoulder with strangers who smell like terror. You catch onion on someone's breath and feel oddly betrayed. A man to your right swings too wide and nearly hits you. A man to your left falls, then rises again with blood on his face and eyes that look centuries old. Someone swings at your head. You duck. They miss. The blow connects with a third soldier who yells and keeps going. You share a look, a brief, almost polite moment of mutual horror. Then it's gone. There's no room for blame here. Just instincts and noise. You try to remember your training, but it was mostly yelling and panic drills. Swing hard. Don't die. That's all they taught you. So that's what you do. You swing. You duck. You miss. You swing again. And somehow, despite the noise, the blood, the confusion, you're still standing. People fall. Sometimes they scream. Sometimes they go silent, like someone flipped a switch. You try not to look. You have to. But you try. This isn't a noble duel in a sunlit field. This is a drunk brawl in the worst tavern imaginable, only it's 500 angry men and no barkeep to end it. And it's far from over. If you thought medieval battle would sound like clashing steel and gallant horns, think again. It sounds like chaos. Like pigs loose in a smithy during an earthquake. It's metal, mud, blood, and too many men who barely know what they're doing. The first thing that hits you isn't a weapon, it's the noise. Screaming, everywhere. Some of it's from the wounded. But most of it isn't. Men yell just to yell. To psych themselves up. To announce that they've been stabbed. To curse their luck. To scream because someone just swung a sword near their face or stepped on their foot. One man spins in place, wildly hacking at everything, including a bush that looked at him funny. There are shrieks from boys who never should have left home, deep roars from ox-sized men wielding axes, and panicked high-pitched yelps from someone who's just realized they're fighting on the wrong side. Somewhere behind it all, someone's shouting "Hold the line." With the hopeless optimism of a man trying to command the wind. But no one's holding anything. You can't even hear him properly. You're too focused on staying upright, staying armed, and wondering whether that weird crunch in your shoulder is normal. Then come the weapons themselves. Swords bash shields. Axes split wood, and sometimes bone. Maces connect with a dull, sickening thump that makes your stomach clench. Arrows hiss past your head with a sound that feels too fast to hear but somehow still slices the air around your ears. Spears punch through armor. And when they do, the scream that follows goes straight through you like ice. But all of that pales next to the worst sound. The wet sounds. They don't tell you about that part. The squish when someone steps where someone used to be. The thick, sucking noise of blood and mud trying to decide who owns the land. The crunch when someone falls and doesn't get back up. These are not sounds that leave you. They stay. They bury themselves in your brain. In your dreams. Around you, men call out for their mothers. Horses scream, a sound so unholy it makes your skin crawl. And above it all, for reasons you'll never understand, someone tries to sing. It's a hymn, you think. It's off-key. It's awful. But it's happening. Eventually, your ears just give up. Not because they're injured. Because they've had enough. Your brain follows suit. There's no time for logic now. No time for strategy. You move on instinct. Block. Swing. Duck. Hope. Repeat. And the screaming. Still going. One moment you're swinging your axe like you know what you're doing. The next, something slams into your back. You feel it deep, like a punch from inside. Your legs fold. Your hands go loose. You drop into the dirt like a scarecrow with cut strings. And no one notices. Not because they're cruel. Because they can't. There's no room for mercy. No space for last words. Just you. The mud. And the sudden knowledge that you should have chosen a monastery. Then there are the horses. Some men aren't stabbed or slashed. They're simply crushed. Flattened under hooves. Nothing screams unheroic death like being trampled by a warhorse named after a flower. And of course, friendly fire. Not the kind with arrows. The kind where someone swings a flail in a hopeful circle and takes off your ear. Or worse. That's how legends are made. He was brave. He was bold. He stood too close to Jeff. Others fall and stay down, some dead, some pretending. Whether they survive depends less on their willpower and more on how quickly the line moves past them. Some get up later. Some never do. The battle doesn't pause. It doesn't wait. It swallows everyone just the same. Surviving a medieval battlefield doesn't mean you were brave. It means you got lucky. Not clever. Not skilled. Just fortunate. Maybe someone else took the arrow meant for you. Maybe you tripped at the right time. Maybe a looter later mistook you for a pile of discarded gear and left you alone. Death, when it came, was rarely glorious. It was random. Petty. Stupid. A foot slipping on blood-slick grass. An ankle twisting in a trench someone used as a latrine. Or a man crushed beneath a stampede of panicked soldiers all trying to escape in the exact same direction. It didn't matter how strong or noble you were. You could die because your shoelaces were imaginary and your luck was up. That's why survivors aren't celebrated as heroes. They're just the ones who didn't get caught by fate's most absurd jokes. And then, there's the cavalry. In stories, they're majestic, knights riding powerful steeds, banners waving, sunlight gleaming off polished armor. Reality? A chaotic mess of horse-shaped missiles barreling forward with no regard for strategy, friendship, or personal space. There's no trumpet. There's no warning. Just a low, building rumble, like thunder brewing under your feet. Not the romantic kind. The bowel-loosening kind. You look up and see them, massive animals, eyes wide, muscles rippling, moving far too fast for anything that eats hay. The knights atop them look regal at a distance, their armor sparkling, crests fluttering, helmets designed to impress. Up close. It's just noise and terror. The horses scream. The men scream. You scream. And the truth becomes very clear, horses don't care. They don't care about your formation, your training, or your daydream of surviving. They don't care if you're an enemy or just a guy trying to live. If you're in their path, you become an obstacle. A smear. A lesson in what not to be. One man is trampled so thoroughly he disappears from sight. Another tries to grab a rider's leg, misses, and catches a hoof in the chest so hard his soul leaves early. Even knights fall. More often than you'd expect. Mud and steel aren't friends. When they hit the ground, it sounds like someone dropped a pantry down a stairwell. Then they flail, arms and legs twitching, looking like confused turtles as they try to rise before someone introduces them to a spear. Even the horses lose it. One bolts sideways, spooked by a fluttering flag, dragging its rider directly toward the latrines. Another just stops. Refuses to move. Knight and horse argue. Loudly. No one intervenes. Meanwhile, you've learned the only rule that matters: don't be under the horse. That's it. That's your survival strategy now. And if you fail that, well, you become someone else's cautionary tale. By the time the dust settles, there's no formation left. Just scattered soldiers, bleeding mounts, and the wreckage of whatever plan once existed. The cavalry? They'll probably do it all again tomorrow. Eventually, it happens. You fall. Maybe someone pushed you. Maybe you slipped on a pile of bile and breakfast. Maybe you tripped over something that used to be part of someone. It doesn't matter. You're down now. And falling in the middle of a battle isn't just inconvenient, it's a turning point. You have maybe 3 seconds. 3 seconds to decide: get up and maybe die, or stay down and maybe die. There's no right answer. You've stopped being a person. You're floor now. Just another lump in the dirt. Boots won't slow down for you. They'll grind past, over, and through. Some try to rise anyway. Covered in blood and grime, they claw their way back into the fight because something in them refuses to quit. Others stay where they fell, some injured, some pretending, some simply done. And truthfully, neither choice makes you a hero. Not here. Not today. Whether you stand or stay, it's all the same gamble. The dice are bloodied. The field is chaos. And somewhere out there, a horse named Buttercup is preparing to charge again. Staying down might feel like the safer option, but it's far from foolproof. People trip over you. Others collapse on top of you. Horses thunder by so close you feel their hooves vibrating through the earth. Looters creep past, prodding bodies with spears, testing for breath, for flinches, trying to separate the truly dead from the talented performers. And if they catch you faking, they might make sure you're not pretending anymore. Still, many choose the tactic. Go limp. Shallow breaths. Pray no one uses your back as a stepping stone. You let the sounds of the battle wash over you, the grinding metal, the screams, the sharp, soggy crack of something terminal happening far too nearby. A soldier slumps beside you. He doesn't move. You don't check if he's alive. You lie there, motionless, the world screaming above you. And if you're lucky, the tide of violence rolls onward. Eventually, the noise thins. The pressure lifts. The smell doesn't improve, but the tension eases. You're still breathing. You didn't move. You didn't fight. But you survived. If you're not buried beneath a pile of limbs and regrets, you stagger upright like something unearthed. Your legs shake. Your vision blurs. You smell like a damp crypt. No one cheers. No one notices. You're just another face with a pulse. But in medieval warfare, that's all it takes to qualify as lucky. The battle is over, but there's no fanfare. No victorious trumpet. No cinematic villain crying retreat. In defeat, it doesn't end with drama. It ends with less sound. Less screaming. Less motion. That's how you know. The noise shifts, from fury to fatigue. The battlefield doesn't roar anymore. It groans. You blink through the sweat and grime. The field is chaos, broken weapons, shattered helmets, and so many bodies. Bits of armor, pieces of men. A single boot sits on a rock like it's resting. It doesn't belong there. Nothing does. A voice mutters, "We won." It's not triumphant. It's hollow. Like he's surprised he's still upright. Another man yells victory, while holding his mostly detached arm in the air like a trophy. You nod, because technically, yes, still breathing, not yet a stain in the mud, that counts. Victory doesn't feel glorious. It feels strange. Heavy. Quiet. You look around and realize that half the people who charged with you are no longer standing. Some are sprawled in the dirt. Some simply walked away in a daze. Some didn't move at all. And the battle? It didn't care. There's no celebration. You might get a mouthful of ale and a loaf of bread hard enough to deflect arrows. A priest shuffles among the fallen, muttering half-remembered prayers. Soldiers rummage through the dead for gear, coins, anything still useful. One finds a good pair of boots and calls it a good day. Your commander, somehow untouched by dirt or blood, gives a rousing speech about honor and valor. No one listens. You can't hear it anyway. Your ears are ringing, and your mind is too busy focusing on staying upright. You think about the friends who didn't get up. You think about your leg, which hurts in ways legs aren't supposed to. You think about soup. Then immediately regret it. Still, you're alive. Scarred. Muddy. Possibly concussed. But alive. And that, by medieval standards, is an overwhelming success. You slump down on a rock, spine aching, lungs burning, and whisper what every survivor of battle whispers at least once in their life: never again. But of course, there's always another skirmish. And so, the groaning takes over as the dominant soundtrack of the battlefield. It's time for the least heroic phase of war, cleanup. You'd like to imagine that means mourning the dead, tending to the wounded. And yes, some of that happens. But mostly, it's triage, looting, and a crude sort of post-battle arts and crafts session, except the supplies are broken swords, splintered bones, and pieces of people no one wants to claim. This isn't the part the songs remember. But it's the part no one ever forgets. The first to arrive aren't heroes. They're medics, in the loosest, most terrifying sense of the word. Not doctors. Just men with knives, questionable vision, and not a single day of formal training. Their greatest skill: delivering comforting phrases like, "We'll have to take that off." If you're lucky, your wound gets a splash of wine. If you're not, the surgeon drinks it himself. You sit with a gash across your thigh, silently hoping it's superficial. The man patching you up usually cuts hair. Now he cuts flesh. He squints at your leg and shrugs. "We'll see," he mutters, before producing a needle so thick it looks like it was forged, not crafted. He waves it over a candle like it's now sterile. You try to be brave. You fail. Around you, the fallen are being dragged into messy, uneven heaps. Some get covered. Most don't. You spot familiar faces in the piles and quickly look away. The scent in the air turns aggressive. Flies descend in clouds. One lands on your wound. You slap it off, realizing grimly that it's likely the cleanest visitor you'll have today. Nearby, the living dig through the dead. Officially, they're recovering gear. Realistically, it's looting. Swords, boots, helmets, anything not attached to a scream is fair game. You join in. You need new footwear, and Gregor doesn't need his anymore. Rest in peace, Gregor. Some men dig shallow graves. Others light funeral pyres. One guy sits on a stone, eyes glassy, a spear still embedded in his arm like a souvenir he's unwilling to part with. You offer help. He declines. It's mine now, he mutters. Bandages are applied with the best intentions. Some hold. Others don't. Infection is more certain than victory. Amputation looms. Death hovers nearby, waiting to see if the flies get there first. By nightfall, the noise dwindles. The wounded stumble back to camp, caked in filth, soaked in blood, moving like they've aged a century in a single day. And in a way, they have. You've survived. Technically. You limp off the field with your limbs still attached and just enough mental coherence to recognize your own shadow. Or at least your new boots. Now comes rest, or the medieval idea of it. You collapse on the driest patch of mud you can find and try to cry quietly. Everything stinks. The air is thick with sweat, blood, overcooked stew, and horse. Not a roasted horse. Just, warm, scared horse. You lie down like a dropped sack of produce. Around you, moans rise and fall like a cursed lullaby. One man sobs. One hums a love song badly. Another prays to every god he's ever heard of. A nearby soldier wipes blood from his blade using his own shirt, while still wearing it. The cook shuffles by, ladling something into bowls. You approach and receive a lump of food that jiggles ominously. It's not soup. It's more of a suggestion. It has the texture of punishment and the color of surrender. You eat it anyway. Pride died hours ago, somewhere between the fifth volley of arrows and the image of a man being slapped unconscious by a spooked warhorse. You try to sleep. You fail. You're bruised, cold, and your neighbor is snoring like a cathedral organ falling down a staircase. You roll over a dozen times and somehow end up damper than before. You stare at the stars and wonder what you did in a past life to deserve this one. Occasionally, someone staggers into camp from the darkness, dragging a sword and muttering promises about next time. There's always a next time. Even when you swear there won't be. Your commander walks by, hands folded behind his back, armor still spotless, boots polished. He nods like he understands. He doesn't. You hate him a little more. But you're alive. Somehow. Every part of your body hurts. Your brain feels like it was boiled in cheap ale. But you're here. And that's what passes for success in war. Tomorrow, the dead will be buried. The wounded will be sorted. Or maybe you'll all march again. Because in medieval war, rest is never rest. It's just the pause between nightmares. Surviving a medieval battle doesn't reward you with glory. What it actually gets you is a damp seat by a sputtering fire, a lukewarm mug of something that vaguely resembles alcohol, and the privilege of rewriting history before the bruises even fully bloom. That's how it always ends, not with a grand ceremony, not with a bard singing your name into legend, but with a circle of bloodied, exhausted men quietly trying to outdo one another with tales that become more absurd by the minute. One claims he took down 6 enemy knights with nothing but a frying pan. Another swears he snatched an arrow out of the sky and threw it back like a spear. Someone else insists he wrestled a war elephant in France, where, as far as anyone knows, elephants do not exist. You nod along. You sip slowly. And you lie, just a little. In your version, you didn't trip over a corpse and scream. No, what happened was a tactical repositioning. The moment you belly crawled into a bush to avoid a cavalry charge. A covert stealth maneuver. The time you begged a teenage squire to hold your hand during the arrow storm. Omitted. Everyone here does the same, bending memory into something less jagged, less real. It's not about boasting. It's about coping. If you can turn it into a story, maybe it won't follow you into sleep. If you can make someone laugh, maybe you'll forget, for a moment, the smell of burning flesh, the cold stare of a man as he bled out beside you, the wet, sharp sound of steel carving into bone. Someone's roasting meat now. No one asks what kind. Someone else strums a lute that's missing 2 strings and all sense of tune. No one minds. A woman hums as she mends a sleeve, her voice floating gently through the smoky air, like the world beyond the firelight has faded into myth. You stare into the flames and try to believe you lived through it, barely, awkwardly, miraculously. Tomorrow you'll march again. Another battle. Another brush with whatever passes for death in this century. But tonight, there's warmth. There's bread. There's the company of men who know that half of your tale is false, because theirs is too. And for one night, that's enough. Meanwhile, far across the world and centuries before the Great Wall became a single unbroken barrier across northern China, the land was a fractured patchwork of feuding kingdoms. This was the Warring States period, a brutal era when 7 powerful kingdoms fought endlessly for control over the Chinese heartland. These states had little use for cooperation. Their diplomacy came in the form of blades, not treaties. Each kingdom responded to threats by building its own walls, not part of any unified vision, but a desperate improvisation. Earthen bulwarks, timber palisades, rough stones packed into crude formations, drawn like lines in the sand, daring neighbors and nomads alike to cross them. These early fortifications were more than defenses, they were declarations. Bold, anxious messages scrawled into the earth, "This land is mine, just try me." But the enemy wasn't always another kingdom. Beyond the cultivated valleys and river towns, nomadic raiders haunted the northern plains. The Xiongnu, swift, skilled horsemen, moved like ghosts, striking settlements and melting into the landscape before retaliation could ever catch up. Their raids weren't just nuisances, they were crises. They shattered trade routes, stole livestock, burned entire villages, and left terror in their wake. So the kingdoms did what frightened powers always do, they tried to wall off the unknown. These early border walls stretched for miles, but they weren't grand. They were fragile, built quickly with packed earth and layered brush, sometimes propped up with stakes or loose stone blocks. Few were built to last. Most didn't. They weren't masterpieces. They were warnings. Warnings to enemies. Warnings to fate. Warnings to the wilderness itself. The early walls of China may have crumbled over time, but what they lacked in permanence, they compensated for in sheer manpower. Tens of thousands of laborers, peasants, criminals, conscripts, were forced into relentless work. Rest was rare. Choice was non-existent. Under the weight of time and weather, many of these rudimentary barriers collapsed. But their purpose ran deeper than stones and soil. They marked the birth of a grander idea, that China's northern frontier could be subdued not by treaties, but by endurance, ambition, and walls. No king of the Warring States era imagined anything close to the Great Wall we recognize today. The concept of a continuous boundary, one stretching like a spine across the empire's back, would not emerge until later, until an emperor rose who didn't just hunger for power, but immortality. That moment came in 221 BCE. After centuries of war, one man succeeded where all others failed, he unified China. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of the Qin dynasty, didn't merely rule, he reshaped the world beneath his feet. What others saw as a broken patchwork of warring kingdoms, he saw as a canvas. And to protect his creation, he ordered something vast. His first move was to link the scattered and crumbling walls of the warring states into a single, cohesive line of defense. Some of these barriers were little more than trenches. Others were already eroding. Qin wanted more than repairs, he demanded expansion. His vision was imperial, immense, and absolute. This was not just military strategy, it was a monument to his will. To build this wall, Qin conscripted hundreds of thousands, soldiers, farmers, exiled scholars, and criminals. The project consumed lives. Many died in isolated mountain passes or searing deserts, their bodies buried beneath the very walls they helped raise. It became known among the people as the longest cemetery on earth. The wall itself was brutally simple in design. Rammed earth was the primary material, packed tightly between wooden frames, layer by layer. Workers stomped it down or beat it into place with heavy logs. Where stone was available, it was hauled by raw strength and primitive tools. The terrain was unforgiving. The labor, backbreaking. But Qin's will never wavered. And the wall was only part of it. Qin also standardized currency, weights and measures, the writing system. He unified not just land but thought. Roads, rules, walls, they were all elements of a larger vision. He wanted order. He wanted a legacy. And he believed he could build it. Though his wall wasn't the towering stone fortress we imagine today, it laid the foundation. Through centuries of collapse and rebirth, that wall would remain, rising and falling like the dynasties it served. After Qin Shi Huang's death and the rapid collapse of his empire, many of his reforms were abandoned. But not the wall. The Han dynasty, which emerged in 206 BCE, understood what Qin had grasped: China's northern border was always a threat. Instead of retreating, the Han pressed forward. They extended the wall, strengthened it, and transformed it from defense line to imperial artery. Under Emperor Wu of Han, the wall took on new meaning. It wasn't just protection. It was strategy. The Han launched massive campaigns against the Xiongnu, the nomadic warriors who had plagued the frontier for generations. As the empire pushed northward, the wall expanded into new lands, lands that would one day become vital corridors of trade and power. The Han didn't just rebuild. They innovated. Where earth once stood, they used stone and brick. They added watchtowers, signal beacons, and permanent garrisons. The wall became more than a border. It became infrastructure. A pulse. A presence. By the time the Han were done, the Great Wall was no longer a dream. It was real, stone by stone, life by life, a boundary that defined not only geography but identity. Watchtowers rose along the spine of the frontier, spaced like sentinels in the dust. From their heights, soldiers could spot trouble long before it arrived. A curl of smoke, a speck of movement on the horizon, these signals, relayed by beacon fire or rider, could race across hundreds of miles within a single day. What began as a barrier now evolved into a lifeline, a living, breathing artery of defense. The Han Wall wasn't just stone and soil, it was strategy. Along its length, the empire planted garrisons, supply depots, and signal towers. It wasn't only about stopping enemies, it was about moving troops, feeding them, and keeping them informed. In times of peace, it functioned as a road. In war, it became a spine of steel. Messages sped through beacon chains. Food and arrows arrived on time. Armies could shift like water along its bones. Yet life along the wall was bleak. Soldiers and settlers endured wind-scoured winters, heat-struck summers, and isolation so vast it swallowed voices. But they endured. Families formed in shadowed outposts. Markets sprang up. Merchants traded goods, and news. At the edge of civilization, two worlds mingled, Han Chinese and nomadic tribes met with wary curiosity. Sometimes it ended in blood. Other times, in trade or kinship. By the twilight of the Han era, the wall had transcended its origin. It was no longer just a defense, it was a presence. A symbol. It meant the emperor's reach extended even into the dust-blown ends of the empire. But empires fade. Even great ones. The Han, for all its might, fell. And with its collapse came chaos. Warlords rose. Kingdoms split. The Three Kingdoms era brought fire, betrayal, and years of bloodletting. In the turbulence, the walls suffered. Sections collapsed, abandoned. Watchtowers, once proud, leaned like broken teeth. In places, vines crept over earthworks. Wind scattered the dust of forgotten guards. Without a central power, there were no repairs, only erosion. Yet the threat from the north never disappeared. The Kanbei, the Rouran, and later the Gokturks surged across the steppes. Some carved kingdoms within Chinese borders. Some raided and retreated. The wall, now fractured and fading, could no longer contain them. It became less defense, more memory, a ghost line that no longer matched the map. Still, it lingered. Local rulers scavenged from its bones. Bricks and stones once laid in imperial unity were now pulled from the earth to build village homes, border forts, and lonely temples. A once mighty monument was slowly cannibalized. But even in decay, the wall whispered. Poets wrote of its silence. They spoke of the lonely north, where soldiers vanished into cold winds and never returned. They sang of border camps, of watchfires and weeping. The wall faded from daily use but burned brightly in the imagination. It became a metaphor, a relic of unity lost. And yet, it endured. Not in strength, but in spirit. It reminded the fractured people of something bigger than warlords and shifting frontiers. The dream of one China. The dream of a boundary both physical and philosophical. A wall that did not just protect, but define. And in time, that dream stirred again. From blood and fire would rise another dynasty. With it, a new generation would return to the northern frontier. And once more, they would look to the wall, not as a ruin, but as a blueprint. Then came the Ming. But not before centuries had passed in chaos. When the Ming dynasty seized power in 1368, China had endured waves of invasion, dynastic collapse, and foreign occupation. The trauma of the Yuan dynasty, ruled by Mongols, still lingered like smoke in scorched air. The Mongol horsemen had swept across the northern plains and ruled China for nearly a century. When the Ming overthrew them, it was not just a political reversal. It was a reckoning. And with it came one overwhelming priority: never again. For the Ming emperors, the idea of a northern barrier wasn't symbolic, it was survival. No more scattered ramparts of tamped earth. No more patchwork garrisons left to crumble. The wall they envisioned would be different. Stone. Brick. Fortified. Permanent. Construction accelerated in the late 1400s and surged in the 1500s, particularly under generals like Qi Jiguang, who saw the wall not merely as defense, but as projection, an assertion of Ming dominance across the landscape. This was a dynasty obsessed with legacy. They built with quarried stone, fired bricks in kilns, reinforced ramparts, installed drainage systems. Watchtowers appeared at regular intervals, with signal stations ready to light smoke by day and fire by night. This was the version of the Great Wall most people imagine today: monumental, winding, iconic, stretching across mountain spines, crawling through deserts, gripping cliffs like a ribbon of ancient armor. Some sections were as wide as modern highways. Others rose 3 stories high. And all of it was built to last. But this wall wasn't just a military barrier, it was a breathing system. Along its length, the Ming constructed garrison towns, supply stations, and troop housing. A parallel society of soldiers, farmers, and administrators lived in its shadow. The wall was no longer just a line between civilization and barbarism, it was a lifeline. For the empire. For the men who guarded it. Still, even stone wasn't invincible. The nomads adapted. Raiders exploited weak points. Corruption seeped into the guard posts. And in the end, when the Manchus came, they didn't breach the wall with fire or fury. They were let through, invited by betrayal. But before that, the Ming did the impossible. They transformed myth into masonry and made the Great Wall truly great. Behind the grandeur, though, was a different truth. The wall was a place of monotony, hardship, and survival. For the thousands of soldiers stationed along it, life was anything but glorious. It was cold. It was thankless. It was forgotten. Troops lived in fortified barracks, clustered garrison towns, clinging to the edges of empire. These weren't elite warriors in gleaming armor, they were conscripted farmers, criminals, peasants. Men who exchanged freedom for boots, meals, and a bed of stone. Some enlisted willingly, chasing pay or honor. Others were sentenced, exiled to the frontier where wind bit and boredom settled like snow. Each day was routine, drills, patrols, hauling supplies, patching bricks. The wall cracked, stones shifted, towers decayed. Soldiers repaired what they could, numb-fingered under desert winds or northern blizzards. No holidays. Only shifts. And the ever-present fear of a Mongol raid just over the horizon. Food was simple, often scarce, millet, salted meat, whatever vegetables could grow in harsh soil. If raiders struck a caravan, it meant hunger, maybe death. Disease swept through camps. Morale crumbled. Desertion was common, despite the threat of execution. Yet not all was bleak. Many soldiers had families with them. Small communities formed, self-contained worlds beneath the wall. Children were born there. Lives began and ended in the shadow of stone. The Great Wall wasn't just a structure. It was a civilization on the edge. A scar across the landscape. A quiet testament to resilience, and to fear. And for a brief moment in the long arc of history, the Ming turned that fear into granite resolve. Merchants wandered between outposts, exchanging more than goods. Wine, cloth, and whispered tales flowed from garrison to garrison. Some of these isolated forts even became melting pots, where Han settlers and nomadic peoples traded, intermarried, or coexisted in tense but practical peace. Along the most remote edges, the beacon towers stood watch, each manned by keepers assigned to one job: scan the horizon. In daylight, they lit plumes of smoke, at night, they raised flames. These signals were swift, simple, and terrifying. These men lived in solitude, often paired off or completely alone. Their companions were silence, cold wind, and endless sky. To live on the wall was to hover between worlds, between civilization and wilderness, myth and harsh reality. These weren't heroes or strategists. They were the invisible lifeblood of the frontier. Ordinary people with cracked hands and frozen boots who held the line long before the generals ever claimed credit. Yet no wall lasts forever. For centuries, the Great Wall had been China's most visible display of might, stone against desert, empire against the unknown. But by the 1600s, the foundation of that strength began to crumble, not from attack, but from the slow rot within. The Ming dynasty, stretched thin and riddled with corruption, faltered. Soldiers went unpaid. Supplies were stolen en route to the frontier. Walls were still manned, but now by men starving, freezing, and forgotten. Desperate, many garrisons turned to trading with the very nomads they were meant to fight. Smuggling flourished. Morale collapsed. The wall was no longer a symbol of discipline, it had become a border of broken promises. And then came the Manchus. Unlike the nomadic raiders of past centuries, the Manchus were organized, politically astute, and determined to rule. They didn't need to storm the wall. They only needed someone to open it. In 1644, that someone was General Wu Sangui. Faced with a rebellion that had taken Beijing and an army too weak to hold, he made a desperate gamble. He opened the gates of Shanhai Pass to the Manchus, hoping they'd help suppress the rebels. Instead, they seized the capital and founded a new dynasty, the Qing. Just like that, the Great Wall's purpose disintegrated. Not with an assault, but with a decision. No siege. No battle cry. Just a gate opened by the very men it was meant to protect. Under Qing rule, the wall faded from strategic relevance. The empire expanded far beyond its reach, rendering it a relic rather than a boundary. Where once it marked the edge of civilization, now it was merely a memory. A line left behind. The wall, centuries in the making, was undone in a moment, not by enemy strength, but internal failure. And yet, legends don't vanish with orders. They linger. As the Qing dynasty pushed China's borders outward, the Great Wall was left behind. Trade shifted. New fortresses rose farther north. The once mighty wall now stood purposeless. Without attention, decay came quickly. Garrisons emptied. Watchtowers collapsed. Locals dismantled sections of the wall to build homes, barns, and wells. Not out of disrespect, but out of necessity. Why haul stone from the mountains when bricks already lay crumbling at your feet? In desert regions, wind buried it grain by grain. In forests, roots splintered stone. Rain washed mortar into the valleys. The Great Wall began to vanish, not in flames, but in silence. But though it eroded stone by stone, the wall never truly disappeared. It remained in poems, in memory, in the shape of the hills where it once stood tall. A symbol not just of defense, but of effort, of fear, and of endurance. And though its purpose faded, the wall endured. Weathered. Forgotten by some, revered by others. Not as an active shield, but as a quiet testament to all who built it, guarded it, and once believed it could hold back the world. Centuries of storms and shifting earth reshaped what were once towering battlements into uneven ridgelines and silent humps scattered across the vast landscape. What had once guarded the heart of an empire now slumbered beneath vines and dust. Though poets still sang of its grandeur, few made the journey. Throughout much of the Qing dynasty, the Great Wall lingered in memory more than in maintenance, a relic of an older age, honored but left to decay. It wasn't until China faced new upheaval, foreign aggression, internal rebellion, and the pressures of modernization, that the wall began to stir in national memory once more. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, foreign explorers and scholars, especially from Europe, arrived with fascination and false assumptions. Some believed the entire wall was the creation of a single emperor. Others insisted it was visible from the moon. They marveled at its ruins, romanticized its story, and planted the seeds of a new legend. When the People's Republic of China was founded in 1949, the wall became more than stone. It was reborn as a symbol of national endurance, pride, and cultural identity. Mao Zedong famously declared, "He who has not climbed the Great Wall is not a true man," turning the ruin into a patriotic destination. In the decades that followed, restoration efforts began, especially near Beijing. Sites like Badaling were rebuilt, their walls and towers restored to Ming Dynasty glory. Tourists arrived in droves, walking reconstructed paths, snapping photos atop parapets. Yet other sections remained untouched, crumbling, windblown, and beautifully wild. They became a different kind of monument, not to glory, but to authenticity. From forgotten ruin to global icon, the Great Wall had completed its transformation. No longer a wall of defense, it became a connection to the past, an enduring symbol of ambition, fear, and human will. The Great Wall of China is now one of the most iconic structures on Earth, but much of what people believe about it is rooted in myth. Contrary to popular belief, it is not one continuous wall, but a vast network of fortifications built over 2 millennia by multiple dynasties. It weaves through deserts, mountains, and plains, but it does not form an unbroken line. And no, it cannot be seen from the moon. Yet the truth is far more extraordinary. The wall is less about stone and more about spirit. It represents a civilization's centuries-long struggle to define itself, against invaders from without, and against chaos from within. It tells stories of emperors obsessed with control, of peasants pressed into backbreaking labor, and of generals whose reputations were built in miles, not victories. It's a monument to ambition, so vast it scarred the land, so lasting it outlived dynasties. To emperors, it stood for power. To the soldiers stationed there, it was duty and hardship. To poets, it echoed with longing and separation. And to modern China, it is a cultural pillar, a reminder of strength and resilience. Millions now visit its restored portions, hiking its steep stairs, running their hands along its ancient stone, posing beside its watchtowers. They come not only for the view, but for the idea, the myth that something crafted by human hands could survive centuries, even millennia. And in many ways, it has. Yet more than 30% of the wall has already vanished, lost to erosion, weather, and neglect. Preservation today is not about expansion, but about memory. About keeping the story alive. About safeguarding the fragments of a civilization's dream. Because the Great Wall was never simply about keeping enemies out. It was about drawing a line between the known and the unknown. Between civilization and wilderness. Between fear and hope. And in doing so, it became more than a structure. It became legend. Stone by stone. Breath by breath. The wall still stands, not only in the hills of China, but in the hearts of those who remember. In 1860, America was both a rising giant and a fragile experiment on the edge of collapse. The Civil War loomed on the horizon, and gold fever was pulling thousands westward toward California. Yet for all its ambition, the United States faced a glaring challenge: its communications simply couldn't keep up with its expansion. The East hummed with telegraph wires and railroads, but the West was another matter entirely. Sending a letter from Missouri to California could take 3 to 4 weeks, assuming no delays, no bandits, no broken wheels, and no collapsing bridges. In a nation drunk on manifest destiny, that kind of wait was unthinkable. People wanted answers faster. Did the gold shipment arrive? Was Lincoln nominated? Waiting a month wasn't an option. Steamships circumnavigating Cape Horn or crossing the Isthmus of Panama had been tried. But they were expensive, dangerous, and glacially slow. The country needed something swifter, something bold. That bold solution arrived in the form of the Pony Express. Audacious, wild, and arguably unrealistic, it offered a daring plan: mount young, nimble riders on the fastest horses available, set up relay stations every 10 to 15 miles, and dash across 2,000 miles of untamed terrain without pause. No weather, no attack, no river or mountain would stop the mail. Rain, snow, or arrows, nothing would delay the message. Suddenly, cross-country mail delivery went from 30 days to 10. It sounded like madness. But so did building a railroad across the continent, and yet, that dream was already becoming real. The Pony Express wasn't just about delivering mail, it was about stitching together a nation that felt like it was being pulled apart. At the heart of it stood a crew of gritty businessmen, teenage riders, and weather-worn station managers. These weren't trained soldiers or civil servants. They were visionaries and gamblers. William H. Russell, Alexander Majors, and William B. Waddell were already veterans of the freight business, hauling supplies through the frontier. But their contracts were drying up, and the economy was uncertain. They needed a new bet, and fast. So they launched a daring business, hoping to win a government contract by proving they could deliver mail faster than anyone in American history. Their company had a long, clunky name: the Central Overland California and Pikes Peak Express Company. Thankfully, the newspapers quickly coined something better: the Pony Express. The stakes were enormous. The terrain was punishing. The riders had to cross the Great Plains, the towering Rockies, and the searing Nevada desert, all with barely enough time to sleep. Bandits, hostile terrain, and extreme weather waited at every bend in the trail. Yet these young men, many teenagers, pushed through. More than 150 relay stations were built. Around 80 riders were hired, and 400 of the fastest, toughest horses were purchased. The first delivery was symbolic, proof that this insane idea could actually work. And work it did. Letters once trapped in wagons for weeks now flew across the continent in under 10 days. The riders became legends in their own time, heroes who galloped through storms, gunfire, and exhaustion. They didn't just carry letters. They carried connection. They carried hope. But no amount of courage could outrun the inevitable. The telegraph was coming. And with it came a faster, cheaper, and more efficient way to share news. In the end, the Pony Express was short-lived, just 18 months long. Yet it carved out a permanent place in American history. It was proof that when the nation needed something impossible, someone would always saddle up to try. The launch of the Pony Express was more than a logistics experiment, it was a declaration. On April 3, 1860, in St. Joseph, Missouri, a young rider leapt into the saddle and galloped west with Abraham Lincoln's inaugural address in his mochila. The crowd cheered as he vanished into the distance. What began as a bold publicity stunt quickly became a legendary race against time. The Pony Express challenged two giants of 19th-century communication, the telegraph and the stagecoach. While those systems relied on static infrastructure or slow, cumbersome routes, the Pony Express promised something radical: speed. It promised to connect east to west in less than 10 days. But behind the curtain, the operation was a financial nightmare. Dozens of stations needed staffing. Hundreds of horses needed feeding. Riders had to be recruited, trained, and paid. Saddles wore down. Equipment broke. But for the moment, none of that mattered. The only thing people cared about was whether this audacious idea could actually work. And somehow, it did. What followed was not just a display of speed. It was a saga of risk, improvisation, and raw courage. Riders braved blizzards, crossed frozen rivers, dodged ambushes, and outran danger. They weren't just mailmen, they were the thin line holding together a rapidly expanding nation. And for a time, they succeeded. But they had to be young. Very young. Preferably orphans. The reason was darkly practical: if a rider died on the trail, no one would complain too loudly. Most were between 14 and 20 years old, weighing under 125 pounds so the horses could run faster. Newspapers advertised for skinny, wiry fellows not over 18, orphans preferred. It was a job posting that sounded more like a dare. And the boys who answered? They were a rare breed, reckless, wiry, and utterly fearless. Each rider carried a mochila, a saddlebag specifically designed for quick swaps at relay stations. Inside were 20 or so letters, tightly packed in oiled leather to protect them from rain, snow, and sweat. Time was everything. At each station, every 10 to 15 miles, they changed horses in a matter of seconds, barely stopping to drink. Each run spanned 75 to 100 miles before they'd collapse into a home station for food, rest, and, sometimes, medical help. Dangers lurked constantly. Bandits, wild animals, treacherous rivers, and violent skirmishes with groups defending their ancestral lands. Despite the risk, riders journeyed alone through vast landscapes, often in total darkness with only the moon and the sound of hooves for company. And yet, miraculously, the mail almost always made it through. In its short 18-month lifespan, the Pony Express rarely failed to deliver. It wasn't just about letters. It was about belief in speed, in daring, and in the idea that America could be connected no matter how wide the wilderness. But the true heroes behind the scenes weren't just the riders. They were the station masters and the tiny network of 157 relay posts that made the whole thing possible. These outposts, rough shelters spaced roughly every 10 to 15 miles, were the foundation. Without them, there would be no legendary rides, no speed records, no miraculous deliveries. Relay stations were sparse, offering little more than a fresh horse and a bucket of water. Home stations were slightly better, small outposts where riders could eat, sleep, and recover before riding again. Together, these stations stitched a fragile thread of civilization across the untamed frontier. The Pony Express may have been short-lived, but for those fleeting months, it turned a dream into reality. It bridged a continent. It defied the odds. And it proved that with grit, guts, and a fast horse, even the impossible could be delivered, on time. The exchange wasn't elegant, but it was fast. At each relay stop, the handoff was a pit stop in the truest sense. Riders galloped in at full speed, flung the mochila, saddlebag of precious mail, onto a fresh horse, and bolted off again in less than 2 minutes. Imagine a wiry teenager with dust in his eyes and adrenaline in his veins, barely old enough to shave, racing through the frontier before anyone could even offer a hello. Home stations were scattered roughly every 75 to 100 miles, bare-bones sanctuaries where the riders could finally eat, rest, and catch a few hours of sleep. These outposts were often maintained by station keepers and their families, who lived in lonely cabins or sod houses with little more than a hearth and a stubborn sense of duty. If someone overslept, forgot to prep a horse, or left a gate unlocked, it could throw off the whole operation. Every second counted. Life at these stations was hard. Supplies were limited. Those in the high deserts or far-flung plains battled more than boredom, they faced freezing winds, raids, and hungry predators. Wolves prowled. Snakes slithered in the shadows. Firearms weren't just tools, they were constant companions. Yet somehow, against all odds, the system worked. Horses were prepositioned. Schedules were brutally tight. Each station beat like a pulse in the great bloodstream of the Pony Express. One misstep, one skipped beat, and the whole network faltered. But when everything aligned, it was a kind of frontier magic. Letters that once took weeks to reach California now made the journey in just 9 or 10 days. A message might pass through dozens of hands and hundreds of hooves, skimming across vast landscapes, and still beat the clock. It was wild. It was fragile. And it was fast. But it was also painfully expensive. The Pony Express was a marvel of speed, but not sustainability. From the first ride, it was bleeding money. The sheer scale of the project was massive, nearly 2,000 miles of terrain covered by dozens of relay stations, barns, corrals, and supply depots. Building and staffing it all cost around $200,000 in 1860, an astronomical sum for the era. The horses alone were a fortune, hundreds of sturdy, lightning-fast animals bred for endurance. Then there were the riders and station workers, all of whom had to be paid, fed, and resupplied. Not well, perhaps, but paid nonetheless. Sending a letter wasn't cheap either. Initially, the cost was $5 for half an ounce, about $170 today. Even after the price dropped to $1, it remained a service reserved for the elite. Urgent business contracts, government messages, and high-stakes news, these filled the saddlebags, not love letters or birthday greetings. Despite its legendary status, the Pony Express never turned a profit. The founders, Russell, Majors, and Waddell, had bet everything on winning a federal mail contract. But that jackpot never came. The U.S. Post Office hesitated. Political instability loomed large, and war was on the horizon. By late 1860, the numbers no longer made sense. Feeding horses, maintaining stations, replacing injured riders, all of it came from the founders' own dwindling coffers. Public admiration painted the Express as a romantic saga of bravery and grit. But behind the curtain, it was a logistical nightmare. And then came the blow that would end it all. In October 1861, everything changed. The hum of progress finally caught up with the gallop of legend. A thin wire, stretched across a continent, accomplished in seconds what horses and grit had taken days to deliver. The transcontinental telegraph was complete. With it came a silent revolution, no hooves pounding the earth, no riders braving the storm, just signals, dots and dashes dancing over copper wire. And just like that, the Pony Express was finished. 2 days after the line went live, the company shut down. No farewell ride. No grand finale. Just silence. 18 months. That's all it lasted. But in that short window, it etched itself into the marrow of the American myth. Not because it turned a profit, far from it. But because it proved that even in the face of impossible odds, Americans would find a way to shrink the vastness of their wild, growing nation. It showed that distance could be defied. On October 24, 1861, the final link in the transcontinental telegraph was completed. For the first time in history, the East Coast and West Coast were connected by electric wire. The very problem the Pony Express had been created to solve, fast, reliable communication across the continent, was solved by something faster and cheaper. Messages that once took 10 days on horseback now arrived in minutes. It wasn't dramatic. There were no daring riders, no midnight sprints across snowy plains. Just quiet operators tapping Morse code through their machines. It lacked romance, but it worked. For the Pony Express, it was like trying to outrun lightning. You could be the fastest rider alive, but you'd never beat a message traveling at the speed of light. For founders Russell, Majors, and Waddell, it was the end of the road. They had wagered everything on winning a federal mail contract. But when the government saw what the telegraph could do, the dream of a horse-powered mail network vanished. Their company dissolved. Their finances crumbled. And their names faded into history's margins. And yet, the Pony Express lived on. The telegraph won the war of practicality, but it couldn't win the story. No one wrote songs about Morse code. No one painted dramatic portraits of telegraph lines. But the Pony Express? That was the stuff of legend. Riders were immortalized in dime novels and folklore. Tales of teenagers outrunning raiders, leaping canyons, and racing through the wilderness at breakneck speed spread like wildfire. Buffalo Bill Cody, whose real involvement with the Express is debatable, became its most famous face. Through his touring Wild West show, he reenacted daring rides across stages from New York to Europe. Audiences cheered as the lone rider barreled through danger, mailbags slung across his shoulder. Truth blurred into myth, but nobody seemed to mind. The Express became a symbol of freedom, frontier resilience, and youthful courage. Though it had failed as a business, it succeeded as a legacy. Towns along the old route began preserving the memory. Statues rose. Historical markers appeared. The legend grew, even as the old trail faded. By the late 19th century, the Pony Express stood for more than mail. It stood for a moment in time, just before the machine age took hold, when a lone rider could still outrun the world. When a message was something you felt in your bones, not just a flicker on a wire. Even today, the Pony Express remains a story that people still want to tell. It's not about efficiency. It's about spirit. And in that sense, it never really ended. In the towns of St. Joseph, Missouri and Sacramento, California, stone markers proudly state, "Here began the Pony Express." These weren't just ceremonial plaques, they marked the birthplace of a legend. Children across the country were taught about brave riders like they were national heroes, galloping into history with little more than a satchel of mail and raw determination. And then, of course, Hollywood arrived in full gallop. Film reels, black and white TV episodes, and big-screen westerns romanticized the tale. The Pony Express became a canvas for exaggerated heroism, riders dodging bullets, leaping canyons, saving towns. The truth, that it was brief, brutal, and economically doomed, was conveniently pushed aside. But the appeal lingered. Why? Because the story spoke to something deep and enduring. It embodied the belief that grit could conquer distance. That youth and courage still had power. That even in the age of machines, there was still room for spirit. It was the ultimate against all odds story, and it stuck. Even after the telegraph lines buzzed overhead, and satellites blinked into the sky, the silhouette of a lone rider tearing through the plains remained burned into American imagination. The Pony Express didn't just move letters. It moved something more elusive, an idea. A story of resilience and ambition that transcended its short lifespan. In a country that built itself through risk and speed, the Express became a perfect metaphor, daring, fleeting, and unforgettable. At its heart was a uniquely American fantasy, that a single person, no matter how young or untested, could carry the weight of a nation's hopes across an unforgiving frontier. A teenage rider, soaked in rain, riding through darkness with arrows at his back, came to symbolize defiance against the impossible. It wasn't about efficiency. It was about audacity. As America surged into the industrial age, the story became a kind of nostalgic fuel. Trains crossed the continent. Telegraphs blinked news from coast to coast. But those technologies lacked soul. The Pony Express was the last moment communication felt personal, raw and real. The last time urgency was measured in breath and bone instead of circuits and wires. Politically, it also served a purpose. It helped reshape the chaotic reality of westward expansion into a tidy, heroic tale. Schoolbooks taught it as a symbol of frontier bravery, skipping over the business risks, the financial ruin, and the violence inflicted on indigenous peoples. A teenage courier sprinting through open country was easier to celebrate than a bankrupt company or a border war. But that doesn't erase its impact. The Express showed that the West could be connected. That human will could bridge the vast, wild spaces. Even in failure, it built momentum. Roads followed its path. Wires were strung where hooves once fell. In a way, it was America's adolescence, wild, imperfect, but unforgettable. Even now, in a world of instant messages and AI, there's still a twinge of wonder in the image of a lone horseman galloping into the unknown. In that dusty outline is a reminder that progress wasn't always sleek or clean. Sometimes it was loud, sweaty, and brave. On October 26, 1861, 2 days after the telegraph line officially opened, the last Pony Express rider reached Sacramento. There were no headlines, no trumpet calls. Just a silent end to one of the boldest experiments in American communication. And yet, that last ride wasn't a failure. It was a moment of triumph, proof that, if only for a time, determination really could outrun the world. The Pony Express had done exactly what it set out to do. It proved that even across the immense and untamed stretches of 19th-century America, communication could be swift, dependable, and powered by pure human will. Though it was ultimately overtaken by telegraph signals racing invisibly through copper wires, the Pony Express had already raised the bar. It wasn't just about speed, it was about boldness, commitment, and the belief that connection across a continent was possible. In the years that followed, the Pony Express began to evolve into something bigger than memory. It became a legend. Town squares erected statues of riders in full gallop. Communities held annual reenactments every summer. Stamps featured galloping horses, wind-whipped riders, and slung mail pouches. And historians, some with a chuckle, others with reverence, kept returning to those 18 whirlwind months that helped America believe in itself a little more. What's often forgotten is just how precarious it all was. Letters were carried in slim, leather pouches built for speed. Horses galloped across punishing terrain, over cliffs, through rivers, across desert and mountain. Many of the riders were barely more than boys. Ambushes, blizzards, broken bones, they faced them all. And still, almost every letter arrived as promised. Against all odds, it worked. The phrase survives because the spirit behind it is timeless. Try it fast, try it hard, and maybe, just maybe, it'll work. In a world where you can send a message across the globe in under a second, the idea of riding 10 days through storms and wilderness seems almost mythic. And that's precisely the point. The Pony Express is remembered not because it endured, but because it dared. For one shining moment, a handful of teenagers on horseback outran the nation's limitations, and in doing so, captured its imagination. Yes, they were overtaken by machines. The telegraph. The phone. The internet. But they accomplished what few ever do. They made history. Then they became folklore. And what made them unforgettable wasn't the speed, but the audacity. As the final echo of hooves faded from the dusty trails of the West, another sound was stirring, this time from the distant grasslands of Central Asia. Long before the violin graced opera houses or took center stage in orchestras, it was born in a world of herders, winds, and horses. Here, early bowed instruments were crafted from wood and horsehair, made to mimic the sounds of animals and the human voice. This wasn't music for entertainment. It was ritual, expression, survival. These instruments, like the morincourt and rebab, produced deep, nasally tones. They didn't pluck or strike strings. They dragged a bow across them, drawing sound out in long, mournful waves. It was a revolutionary idea, sound sustained by friction, instead of fleeting touches. As trade routes expanded, these ideas moved westward, carried by travelers and musicians along the Silk Road. The rebab found its way into Persia, the Arab world, and by the 9th century, into Muslim Spain. Meanwhile, the Byzantine Empire developed its own bowed instrument, the lyra, which would influence styles from Greece to the Balkans. Each culture left its mark. Shapes changed. Tunings evolved. Strings were added. The result wasn't a straight evolution, but a family tree, branching, varied, rich. By the Middle Ages, the rebab had transformed into the viol and the fiddle, crude bowed instruments held to the chest or under the chin. These were played in taverns, on church steps, and in royal courts. Their sound was rough, but intimate. The bow had given music a new form, not chopped notes, but long, expressive voices. Though these early fiddles lacked standardization, no consistent tuning, no refined form, the spirit of the violin had already begun. And like the riders of the Pony Express, those early players knew they were chasing something big. Something lasting. The idea was already alive, an instrument more agile, more expressive, more human. It simply waited for the right combination of genius, place, and time. As the medieval world gave way to the Renaissance, Europe exploded with new ideas in art, science, and sound. And quietly, in workshops and courts, an instrument was evolving, not just in form, but in purpose. The rough-hewn fiddles and viols of previous centuries were being reshaped, not only to look more elegant but to serve a greater expressive function. Instruments were no longer confined to folk dances or liturgical drones, they were becoming tools of personal expression, capable of capturing the nuance of a sigh or the thrill of a verse. By the 15th century, bowed instruments were widespread across Europe. They could be heard at weddings, in taverns, court performances, and city festivals. But despite their popularity, no two instruments looked alike. One version, the viol, often had 5 strings and varied greatly in body shape depending on its maker. Another, the lira da braccio of Italy, featured a broad body and flat bridge, perfect for playing chords. Yet even as their use grew, these instruments had serious shortcomings. They lacked the strength to project sound across large rooms. Their tuning was inconsistent. Their construction was still too crude to support virtuosic playing. Composers and performers began asking for more clarity, more power, more refinement. They wanted an instrument that could sing like a human but respond like a flute. And while music was evolving, so too was the craft of making instruments. In the artisan towns of Italy and Germany, luthiers were pushing boundaries. They experimented with new shapes, using curved wood, improved varnishes, and sharper tools. This wasn't just trial and error, it was science born through tradition. Makers discovered that a thinner wooden top helped resonance, a rounded back enhanced projection, and an arched bridge enabled cleaner, more precise string playing. Musical tastes were shifting as well. Composers started writing melodic, lyrical parts for string instruments. The bow was no longer just for rhythm, it was for leading voices, solo lines, and emotional storytelling. The moment was ripe. Europe had centuries of bowed string tradition, the cultural fire of the Renaissance, and now a new generation of craftsmen ready to do something radical. What it needed was one visionary to bring it all together. That figure emerged in Cremona, a modest town nestled in the fertile plains of northern Italy along the Po River. Though not a political capital or military stronghold, Cremona was a hub of artisanship, home to guilds of woodworkers, builders, and musicians. It was here that the violin as we know it was truly born. At the center of this quiet revolution was Andrea Amati, a gifted and pioneering luthier. Drawing inspiration from the lira da braccio and other early fiddles, Amati streamlined the instrument's body. He refined its arching, standardized its proportions, and introduced innovations that defined the modern violin. Among these was the use of F-shaped sound holes, which improved acoustics and added structural strength. His instruments were smaller, lighter, and far more responsive than any that had come before. They were also tuned in perfect fifths, an innovation that gave the violin its vocal, agile, and soaring range. It was a revelation. No longer limited by clunky design or unreliable tuning, the violin could now do what musicians and composers had long dreamed of, convey emotion with intimacy and power. Amati didn't just create new instruments, he laid a foundation. His violins weren't curiosities, they were blueprints. His work became the model for generations of makers who would follow, including the famed Guarneri and Stradivari families. And with that, a new era of music began. One where the violin could lead, enchant, and speak in a voice no instrument ever had before. By the mid-1500s, Andrea Amati's violins had become the prized possessions of European nobility. His craftsmanship caught the attention of King Charles IX of France, who famously commissioned a matched set of 24 violins for the royal court. These instruments weren't just for music, they were symbols of prestige, each one painted, gilded, and fashioned as a fusion of engineering brilliance and visual elegance. But why Cremona? Some attribute it to the quality of local spruce and maple, which produced superior tonal wood. Others cite the town's mild climate, ideal for drying wood slowly and evenly. Still others point to the strength of its artisan culture, where secrets were not written down but passed orally through generations of apprentices, maintaining a tight chain of knowledge. Whatever the cause, Cremona became the Florence of violin making, a small town birthing timeless greatness. From this unlikely hub emerged an instrument that could sing, cry, plead, or proclaim. It leapt across Europe, quickly evolving from folk accessory to a star of courtly performances. By the 1600s, the violin was no longer confined to small workshops. It was traveling between royal palaces, cathedrals, and concert halls. Its voice, sharp, bright, emotional, was conquering the musical world. Italy remained the heart of the violin's cultural journey. Composers like Claudio Monteverdi were among the first to use violins in serious compositions. In his groundbreaking opera Orfeo, the violin wasn't just an accompaniment, it was a storyteller. It expressed longing, celebration, and divine emotion. It transformed from a rustic tool into an instrument of theater and myth. Soon, Italian violin makers and players carried the instrument abroad. They traveled to Germany, Austria, and France, where elite courts were eager to absorb the latest trends. In Paris, King Louis XIV made the violin a symbol of national pride. His famed 24 violons du Roi, a 24-member royal string ensemble, elevated the instrument's reputation even further. Across the Rhine, German and Austrian builders began shaping their own traditions. Luthiers like Jacob Stainer developed broader, deeper-bodied violins with a warmer, more mellow tone, contrasting the brilliance of the Italian sound. Meanwhile, violinists such as Heinrich Biber pushed the boundaries of technique. His compositions challenged players with rapid passages, double stops, and expressive ornamentation. The violin was no longer just beautiful, it was demanding, dynamic, and virtuosic. Even churches began to embrace the instrument. Once considered too worldly for sacred music, it now filled cathedrals with rich harmonies, blending with choirs and organs to elevate spiritual expression. It participated in sacred oratorios and accompanied prayers, shedding its reputation as a tavern instrument and becoming part of the divine. By the end of the 17th century, the violin had become indispensable. It was central to music in every context, from smoky taverns to royal banquets to candlelit churches. Its flexibility and emotional depth gave it a place in every venue, every ensemble, every story. But its greatest moment was yet to come. As the 18th century approached, the golden age of violin making arrived. And with it, a name that would be etched into music history forever, Antonio Stradivari. If Amati created the violin, Stradivari sculpted its soul. Born in Cremona in 1644, he was trained in the Amati tradition but soon carved out his own legacy. His violins weren't copies, they were evolutions, marked by elegance, balance, and unmatched resonance. Stradivari's instruments would become legendary. They set a new bar for craftsmanship, power, and tonal beauty. His genius didn't just perfect the violin, it defined it for centuries to come. In the final decades of the 17th century and into the dawn of the 18th, one man elevated the craft of violin making into something transcendent. Antonio Stradivari was not merely a luthier, he was an artisan whose instrument set a standard that has endured across centuries. His violins, violas, and cellos were more than tools, they were vessels of sound so refined that even now, no modern maker has fully replicated their magic. Stradivari's genius lay in every detail. He selected his wood with precision, slow-grown spruce for the top plates, flamed maple for the backs, each piece seasoned to perfection. He shaped each arch with subtle asymmetries, adjusted the thicknesses down to fractions of a millimeter, and applied a varnish that is still the subject of scientific fascination. The results were instruments with remarkable projection, depth, and warmth. They could carry sound to the farthest balcony of a concert hall or draw in a single listener with the quietest whisper. Over his long career, Stradivari built more than 1,000 instruments. Roughly 650 survive, many with their own names and histories, the Messiah, the Soil, the Lady Blunt. These violins aren't simply preserved, they're played by the finest musicians today, a testament to their enduring brilliance. Researchers have X-rayed them, measured every curve, analyzed varnish particles, yet the complete recipe remains elusive. What made a Stradivari violin so special? The answer lies in the marriage of science, instinct, and artistry. His fame spread throughout Europe during his lifetime. Royal courts, elite performers, and wealthy patrons clamored for his creations. His workshop in Cremona became legendary, and after his death in 1737, the name Stradivari became synonymous with perfection. Owning one wasn't just about music, it was status, reverence, and legacy. With the violin's design perfected, attention turned to its performance. In the 18th century, the instrument emerged from the background and claimed the spotlight. No longer confined to accompaniment, it began to sing with personality and purpose. It became the storyteller of the orchestra, and in the hands of a virtuoso, a force of awe. Among the first to truly showcase the violin's potential was Arcangelo Corelli. His playing wasn't flashy, but his sonatas shaped Baroque violin technique. He emphasized grace, tone, and structure. His music was lyrical, carefully composed to showcase the violin's expressive capabilities. Corelli laid the foundation for all who followed. Then came Antonio Vivaldi, the fiery Venetian known as the Red Priest. Vivaldi didn't just write music for the violin, he expanded its vocabulary. His compositions, especially the Four Seasons, were revolutionary. Through his bow, the violin mimicked bird calls, storms, trickling brooks, and sweltering heat. He showed that the violin could speak, dance, and paint pictures in sound. His 230 concertos weren't just exercises in technique, they were stories, alive with emotion and imagery. With the rise of these composers, the violin shed its rustic origins. It was no longer just a fiddler tool or a dancehall companion. It became the primary voice of Baroque and classical expression. As it traveled from Cremona's workshops to the great concert halls of Europe, it carried with it the soul of its makers and the dreams of its players. The 18th century marked the shift from craftsmanship to performance. The age of the violin maker gave way to the age of the virtuoso. With Stradivari's and Guarneri's tools in hand, performers would push the limits of what this instrument could do. They would challenge its range, expand its role, and etch their names alongside the legends of the bow. And through it all, the violin, born of wood and wire, remained the most human of instruments. Agile, passionate, melancholic, defiant. In its voice, we hear not just music, but memory, ambition, and the echo of centuries. As musical sensibilities shifted toward the classical era, the violin didn't just remain relevant, it thrived. Composers such as Mozart and Beethoven began crafting sonatas and concertos that called for more than technical brilliance. They demanded storytelling, emotion, and grace. The violinist was no longer just a skilled hand but a performer who needed to breathe life into each note, to embody the music as both narrator and dancer in harmony with the orchestra. But it was in the early 1800s that the violinist transformed from musician to myth. Enter Niccolò Paganini, a gaunt, enigmatic figure whose mastery of the instrument seemed almost supernatural. With lightning-fast fingers, eerie charisma, and a flair for the theatrical, Paganini captivated audiences and ignited rumors that he'd sold his soul to the devil. His command of techniques like harmonics, double stops, and left-hand pizzicato redefined what was thought possible on 4 strings. His 24 caprices remain some of the most technically demanding works ever written for solo violin, a rite of passage for any serious player. Paganini reshaped violin performance, turning it into spectacle. After him, violinists weren't just musicians, they were icons. And the violin itself became a symbol of both divine inspiration and almost demonic virtuosity. This transformation began in the Baroque orchestra. Composers like Bach and Handel positioned strings as the base of their ensembles, introducing first and second violin sections to create both harmonic depth and melodic brilliance. At this stage, orchestras were still modest in size, tight-knit groups that delivered intimate, intricate performances. Yet already, the violin was emerging as the ensemble's driving force. The classical era saw the full expansion of the orchestra. Composers like Haydn and Mozart weren't just writing music, they were shaping the very concept of the modern symphony. Haydn, often hailed as the father of the symphony, used violins to carry sweeping themes, anchoring complex textures. Mozart took that foundation and soared. His writing for violins was elegant and lyrical, combining joy, melancholy, and divine beauty within just a few measures. The violin became not just a part of the orchestra, it became its soul. But it was Beethoven who pushed everything further. He increased the size of the orchestra, deepened its emotional palette, and assigned bold, expressive passages to the strings section. First violins were tasked with singing the main themes, while second violins provided intricate counterpoint and rhythm. The violin section wasn't background anymore, it was the emotional and dramatic engine of the entire work. As Romanticism took hold, the orchestra swelled. The violin, already revered, now sat at the very heart of this massive musical machine. Composers like Brahms, Tchaikovsky, and Dvorak wrote with passion and grandeur, often choosing the violin to voice their most heartfelt themes. Sweeping melodies, stormy climaxes, tender whispers, the violin could do it all. Playing in these orchestras demanded more than talent. It required stamina, sensitivity, and a deep sense of ensemble unity. The violinist became not just a performer, but a vital cog in a powerful engine of expression. Leading them was the concertmaster, a role that had grown increasingly important. The concertmaster wasn't just the best player, they were the bridge between the conductor's vision and the orchestra's execution. They set the bowings, tuned the group, and led with poise and precision. From cozy chamber halls to vast symphonic stages, the violin had woven itself into every fiber of Western music. It wasn't merely a tool or an accessory. It had become the living voice of the symphony, speaking in whispers and roars, laughter and longing, elegance and fury. It was the sound of the orchestra's heart. By the dawn of the 20th century, the violin had already secured its place in the concert halls of Europe. But its story was far from over. No longer confined to the orchestra or the opera pit, the violin began to travel across genres and cultures, weaving its voice into musical traditions far beyond its Italian roots. In Eastern Europe, the violin had long been a cornerstone of Romani music. There, it danced and wept, full of virtuosity and soul. Passed down not through conservatories but by ear and heart, the violin in Romani hands became a symbol of celebration, resistance, and deep cultural memory. Across the Atlantic, the violin became the fiddle. In American bluegrass, folk, and Appalachian traditions, it traded concert black for denim and boots. It led barn dances, carried stories in reels and jigs, and transformed into an instrument of the people. With rapid bowing, improvisation, and open tunings, the fiddle became a symbol of American musical roots. Meanwhile, in Latin America, the violin was equally at home. In mariachi bands, it sang over trumpets and guitars. In tango, it swirled alongside the bandoneon, shaping Argentina's melancholic dance. Everywhere it went, the violin didn't assert dominance, it listened, adapted, and thrived. Jazz brought yet another transformation. In the 1930s and 40s, artists like Stéphane Grappelli gave the violin a playful swing in Paris's hot clubs. Later, Jean-Luc Ponty and Regina Carter reimagined it for jazz fusion, turning it into a voice capable of syncopation, groove, and freedom. By the 21st century, the violin was a true global citizen. It could sing in any language, classical, jazz, folk, or experimental. Its voice could be smooth or scratchy, polished or wild. And yet, it always remained undeniably itself. Today, the violin exists at a fascinating crossroads. It still leads orchestras and commands the stage in concert halls. But it also thrives in spaces the old masters never imagined, on YouTube, in fusion bands, or amplified on festival stages. Its voice remains haunting, human, and endlessly adaptable. In the classical world, young virtuosos continue to stun audiences, playing centuries-old concertos with new emotion and fire. Competitions like the Queen Elizabeth or the Menuhin launch international careers. The old tradition is alive, but something new is happening. Contemporary composers are stretching the violin's boundaries. With electronics, extended techniques, and non-Western tunings, they're pushing the instrument into new realms. Now, it scratches, whispers, shrieks, and taps. It imitates machines, mimics birds, or plunges into chaos. In the hands of innovators like Hilary Hahn, Patricia Kopachinskaya, and Curtis Stewart, the violin becomes a laboratory of sound. Technology has reshaped how we learn it. Electric violins are now mainstream in pop and rock. Artists like Lindsey Stirling combine dance, EDM, and cinematic visuals into viral performances. Education has gone digital. Students around the world now learn from masters via online lessons, tutorials, and shared sheet music. But this accessibility raises a new question: how do we balance instant access with the patience and discipline music requires? And yet, through all this, the violin endures. Because at its heart, it's more than an instrument. It's an extension of the human voice. It sobs. It sings. It pleads. Whether on a subway platform or a global stage, its sound cuts through noise, demanding attention, emotion, stillness. Delicate yet defiant. Ancient yet evolving. The violin isn't just a relic or a relic of tradition, it's a storyteller whose story continues to unfold with every bow stroke. And as long as there are hands to play it, the violin will keep singing.